Hello, folks. Another episode of Burning Platform, and it's good to have Bob Evans back. Bob is founder of Cloud Wars and co-founder of Acceleration Economy. And Bob and I are going to talk about, the last few months in the industry. We all go to different events, so we'll summarize some of the trends we've seen, and hopefully we'll disagree with each other and just have fun for the next 25 to 30 minutes. Bob, thank you for joining me.
Hey,
Welcome.
Vinnie, it's always great to be with you, and thank you for having me on Burning Platform.
Absolutely. So why don't you start with talk the last few months? What has been, any um, consistent themes you're seeing, any unique themes you're seeing? Clearly, generative AI is going to come up a few times, but what else have you seen in the last few months?
Yeah, sure, Vinnie. One thing is, and the irony of this, I just think is pretty wild, and I hope for any thoughtful person that there are lessons in it for us, and that is, right. Remember, it was fashionable 3, 4, 5 years ago to talk about how SAP and Oracle were dinosaurs, legacy companies. They don't get the cloud. They don't understand it. They're going to get crushed. Their history. And now two of the fastest growing major cloud companies in the world are Oracle and SAP. So there is something, I think, for all of us to learn about the power of incumbency and fresh leadership and taking things in new directions. And Vinnie, one other one, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this, is I think there is emerging a predisposition toward alliances or partnerships among the big cloud vendors, more so than I've seen before. It's almost like they're finally figuring, hey, I can't solve everybody's problems. Let me align and partner up with people who are going to help to get, so we can do together for our customers what neither of us could do individually. I think it's very healthy, very refreshing.
So let me tell you, it's been good to get back into the physical event world, right?
Yeah.
There's a different vibe. Now, getting there has gotten worse, I would say, since before the pandemic.
Yeah.
It's not the airlines, it's the stupid hotel problems, it's whatever, right? But it's good to get together. So that's one common trend I've seen. And the vendors are really making a great effort to make us feel welcome at these physical events.
Yeah.
The other thing is, I've been telling executives, I've never been more excited about the application software market. And let me tell you why. 4 different broad markets. They could be trillion-dollar markets in my estimate. One is what I call vertical edge applications. 4 things conspired in the last 4 years: COVID, Ukraine crisis, climate change urgency, and massive digital transformations. Didn't happen in those 4 years, but the end result are visible now, right? And they have allowed us to create new applications that we couldn't imagine 4 years ago. Let me give you a few examples. Curbside check-in in retail, right? COVID made it necessary. Telemedicine, COVID made that necessary, right? If you look at digital economies, look at the returns processing for e-commerce, look at how much scale is needed. 20% of e-commerce is being returned. You can't just have a store associate decide, I'm going to restock this or whatever. I mean, you need a very elaborate returns process. That's become a major, intelligent returns has become a major application. EV battery management, we didn't need that 4 years ago. Suddenly now, roaming billing as it applies to EV batteries. That's become, so there's a whole bunch of new vertical edge applications. I'm tracking about 100 of them that has emerged just in the last few years. Each one of them is going to be, in total, they're going to be $1 trillion market. Second thing is, and was recently in India for about a month. It just blew me away, the energy in that economy.
Yeah.
That's the positive. I mean, clearly they're not at our wealth level, but just the energy is unbelievable. And they're doing business basically not just with the West, they're doing business with the Middle East, Indonesia, the BRICS countries, Nigeria, etc. There's a whole bunch of new markets that are emerging that I'm not sure the Western vendors have paid much attention to. But they're going to be, whether we like it or not, these are going to be big markets in their own right with unique functionality, unique price points and all that, right? So that's the second one. The third thing is obviously the whole new AI excitement. It's hyped up right now, but that's going to be another market. And the fourth thing I'm seeing, you deal with a number of CIOs, is there's a lot of interest in low code, no code for domain experts, right? I mean, it takes different shapes and forms, but many of them are saying, I'm not going to wait for vendors years, beg of them to develop for my industry or for my location. I'm just going to let my domain experts build their own applications. So those four markets are pretty damn exciting from my perspective. So I'm asking every vendor, what are you doing about each one of them, right?
Yeah.
And like I said, the international one, number of the US vendors are like, I can't make money in those markets. Well, fine. You're not going to be there. It doesn't mean that market isn't going to take off. So,
yeah.
So I would say those are the kind of the broad trends I've been seeing for the last few months. Okay. Why don't we do this, Bob? You and I have gone to several events. Why don't we pick two that both of us went to, and then we can pick one that you went to that I wasn't at, and I'll tell you about one that I was
Right.
at. Okay. So
Sure.
do you want to start with the latest one you and I were both at, which is SAP Sapphire? Give me your perspective from that. And
Sure. Yeah. And Vin, if I could, before you do that, I just wanted to touch on what you were saying. All your 4 points were terrific. No surprise on that. But the ideas, the big trends you're coming up with and following are great. But I did want to say something. I agree with you about the international, and some of these markets are probably going to pop and become quite big and vibrant sooner than perhaps some of the big tech vendors are imagining. But I think we got to come up with a new name for BRIC, right? Because the R in there, I don't think many people are eager to do business with them. And then the whole issue with China, right? You could look at it on the one hand and say, whoa, big market, it's going to be huge, but there's some real complications about that. So I get your big point overall, but we're going to have to probably get accustomed to constantly modulating who's in these appealing, fast-growing companies. So then your point was, last week at Sapphire, and
by the way, before we move away from that,
yep,
Russia and China are doing fine. We may not want to do business with them. They're doing fine selling to each other, right? You look at the oil market, Russia's doing fine, right? And let's substitute Indonesia. Let's put in Nigeria. Let's put in, other countries. Trust me, most US vendors are clueless what to do in Nigeria. So somebody will do that market. Maybe not the vendors you and I know, right?
Yeah. So Vinnie, at Sapphire, a few minutes ago, you made the point about it's great being back at face-to-face events. I sure agree with you. And you said getting there has not always been fun in the airlines. I felt at different times like, we're cattle being herded, into a certain direction. And every once in a while, they'll dump some buckets of water on us and throw some straw at us, and we moo and everything's okay. And then we get shunted off to, whatever the next thing is. I used to feel, Vinny, like some of these big tech events were like that. They were the destination version of the cattle car travel industry. But it's so different now because they're not getting those massive numbers. They're still pretty good. And they realize people don't come to these big events to be talked at about the latest technology for 8 hours a day. They want to see each other, talk to each other, have a conversation. So I think, whether all the big vendors are doing a better job, just some simple thing like the floor layout, right? You don't feel like you're getting heard and constantly, for the big voice up there, wah, about stuff that you don't care about. It's not why I went to this thing. So I think that's been very helpful, and they're accepting it. And I think then in parallel, what SAP did, and I'm sure others are on this track as well, they're saying, we have to redefine and reimagine how we do these events, given those great 4 points that you ticked off at the beginning about stuff that wasn't here 3 or 4 years ago. And it's very urgent now. Vin, I tell you, the one thing that came out of Sapphire that stuck with me is if each of us had a nickel for every time the phrase end to end was used at Sapphire, we could go off and play golf all day. But I think they did it not.
I think a close second would be clean core.
Right. Right. I was trying to find somebody who wanted a dirty core, but I wasn't able to find anybody. But Vinnie, that the trick that SAP pulled off in a very good way was, let's talk about this because we see this as sort of the mega issue our customers have to deal with. And they adapted their presentation of what SAP's technology is about to that. So I would give SAP a high grade on saying, this is what we're going to talk about at Sapphire because this is what customers are talking about. And I think, Vinnie, it's a big shift and a very welcome shift away from the vendor saying, I'm going to use my event to pound home my new agenda to these people. And I hope a few of them will decide they're going to buy it. But I'm going to talk about my agenda at my event. And thank goodness, I think those days are ending.
Well, so I'm writing a note on a couple of days at Sapphire, and I'm measuring them against the 4 markets that I identified, right? And when I first got there, the first day, I was like, they have a new website, and Julia is clearly proud, and they should be. I've navigated a few pages of that, but the homepage said ERP, CRM, HCM, SCM. And I go, I was a Gartner in the mid-90s. We coined these terms in the 90s. Why is the homepage kicking off with the 90s? Right?
Yeah.
And then look, we're no spring chicken, but I looked around the room and there were the Gartner and the IDC and the Forrester folks that are creating magic quadrants and marketscapes for those exact acronyms. And I go, this is a time warp. I'm not looking at the future here, but it got better, right? Because Julia said, look, we're going to be addressing multiple buying center, and Kristen surely did multiple. Now, Keynote was masterful that time because there are so many buying centers, so many industries, so many big brand names, covered a lot of ground in a little over an hour, right? I think in different ways, you had to find it. There's so much content at a place like Sapphire. I think they need a better guide to where to find it. But I was impressed with the show floor. Was really impressive.
Yeah,
generous in space. They went through the farm to consume, a lot of robotics in farms, to the retail experience. With the sensors and all that in retail. I thought it was well done to be able to move all that technology around. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
So overall, I was fairly impressed. And you mentioned earlier, people had written off SAP as kind of an old school thing. I think Christian has brought his team. His entire management team is pretty young.
Yeah,
he's brought a new life, a new level of energy to SAP, which is clearly showing. So
yeah. Vinnie, I would encourage people, if we could find it's almost like a course in, what you just described with Christian. No guarantees, but how do you try to identify the potential of a new leader? So I think he was 39 or 40 years old 3 years ago in April when he had to do his first earnings call as the sole CEO. A few weeks earlier, the world got rocked by the true breakout and the implications of COVID. SAP couldn't even offer guidance for the second quarter. And I thought there were points in that earnings call where Christian was certainly respectful, but he pushed back pretty hard on some of the analysts who expected, you got to have all the answers immediately. And he was saying, look, this is a long game. We're putting a lot of urgency into this. But I like the fact that he didn't just knuckle under to the prevailing ideas and models, instead pushing back and saying, here's what we need to do for us and for our customers and for our partners to get through this. And you folks on the analyst side might have your own view of how it's happening, but I admired his feistiness at a point that most people would consider the lowest or most challenging that you could have. And I'm glad to see that for each of the successive 12 quarters since then, he's just built on that. I think he's become so comfortable now in articulating the company's vision through the eyes and the aspirations of its customers. And that's enormously difficult. And he's handled that in a short period of time, I think, superbly.
Well, let's move on to another one. You and I a Workday event, not so much a user conference, but a analyst summit, right? So you go a few weeks back. So I know we're getting younger by the day. So rack your memory and tell me about what you thought about that.
Vinnie, I'll tell you, the major piece of feedback that I offered to the Workday folks on this, and for the 2 or 3 of these analyst summits I've been to for Workday, they come in and they first talk about their technology. And I have suggested to them, I think you ought to first talk about what's going on in the world. What are your customers talking about? What are their issues? And then when you come and talk about your technology, there's context for how that goes. And, I think the company has a very, very strong connection to and devotion to its customers. I'm not questioning that, but it is this mindset of these companies. The more they get out and are breaking out of the, what you just, jabbed at a little, the 30-year-old ERP, SCM, HCM, all the other 3-letter acronyms. And as they get more engaged in co-creating those vertical edge applications you described, Vinnie, as these tech companies do more of that, I think it's incumbent on them to say, hey, let me tell you what I see out in the world today, where there's opportunities for us to do things. And then when I talk about products, it'll fit into this context of why we're doing that, driven by what customers want and need. So that was my first and overriding impression there at Workday. Would you respond to that, Vinnie, or should I add in another one?
It's funny, Bob. I told them that Workday was one of the first vendors to move to the analyst summit model, 12 years ago.
Okay.
And 13
well, yeah, you've been to every one, right?
Yeah, Anil pointed that out.
Fantastic.
I was like, should I be flattered? It's like Marriott sending me a note saying, congratulations, you stayed with us 1,800 nights. I'm like, I don't think I should be proud of that. I think the 3rd or 4th summit, I said exactly what you said. And one of them snapped at me and said, Vinnie, this is a technology summit.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
yeah.
Basically we presented in other forums about business trends and so on. But I think you're right. I mean, having an hour's presentation would not hurt, would set the context, right? So, my feedback would be, I thought 3 or 4 things really stood out from him. So Anil seemed extremely energized. I haven't seen him so energized in a long time, right? He's got Carl now to take care of the field, right? He can focus much more on product and strategy. He's just very energized. So that was one. Meeting Carl clearly was, another highlight. Cyan doing his clinic on AI, the history of AI, just, I was like blown away by how almost academic he is in terms of, the whole history of where we've gone and how generative AI is just rapidly accelerating and so on. And I always like they bring several customers on, and let you mingle with them and so on. So, to me, they have a lot of other vendors have started doing summits. Workday always it makes you feel welcome, comfortable, and so on. They're doing a nice job. And, the location wasn't too shabby either. So.
No. Vinnie, I wanted to, a moment ago when I brought that up about you've been to all 12, my point on that was just that it's easy for somebody who self-describes as an analyst to fall into the thing of, because I'm an analyst, I know everything, rather than saying, I work real hard to understand a lot of things, therefore I deserve this title of analyst. And I think there's a lot of people who go out and they have about this much insight into the different companies, but because they call themselves an analyst, they're blabbing away about this or that, and you can just tell they don't understand it. You are the opposite of that. You go deep into these companies, each one's personality, its history, its technology, its customers, and you bring a sense of expertise and insight that is very rare in this business. So I meant the 12-year thing completely.
Bob, not everyone likes that. At Gartner, we used to use the term influence versus intelligence, right? Influence is what, just get me on the magic quadrant. You're doing it. Others would call and say, hey, look, we're about to enter a new market. We're about to make an acquisition day. What are you seeing in the market? The second has become rarer and rarer. There's way too many vendors who just want praise.
Yeah.
In fact, they're afraid to call and say, if you ask Vinnie, we're gonna, he'll probably, we're giving him an early advantage into something new. We're considering, come on, guys, we're all grown up, all tied by NDAs and all that. So it's kind of interesting how the vendor world also they follow scripts, right? I mean, there's so many people who coach them about how to handle analyst relation. I'm like, guys, be natural. Right. Don't listen to some coach telling you how to do analyst relation.
Right. You got to this position of being a CEO or something like that on your own and through your own instincts. Vinnie, I agree with you completely. And Vinnie, the other thing about and again, I'm not taking shots at Gartner or anybody else. You got waves and quadrants and all that. That's great. Go do that. But I think there's this massive cohort of new buyers, new influencers. And I don't think a lot of those people from outside the tech world, I don't think they give a rat's ass about, where somebody places, horizontally and vertically. They want to say, hey, I have this business challenge and the CEO has his or her foot on the back of my neck. And I need to find out right now here today, which tech company is willing to understand my specific issue and work with me to develop a great business outcome. Maybe there's some correlation between those choices and quadrants or waves. I don't know. But I think that those things just, a lot of the new chief financial officer influencers and chief revenue officer, chief operations officer, head of product development, they couldn't care less about those things.
Bob, thank you for saying that. And I wish vendors would listen.
Yeah.
A lot of attention to pay for those little, did I move up a little bit, a little micro, a millimeter in the magic quadrant?
Yes.
Let's go to the couple of vendors that, for whatever reason, we weren't together, right? Yeah. So let me go first on that. So I went to a fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I've become a big fan since Workday introduced the Analyst Summit format over a decade ago, right? And different vendors have evolved that. So Plex used to take us to customer plants as part of the visit, right? So they'll have an analyst half a day, and then they'll take it to a customer plant, show off their manufacturing software on live, right? I really enjoyed those visits. Others have combined them with customer advisory board meetings. So we get to meet many customers as part of that. Zoho took a few of us all the way to headquarters in Chennai, India, South India.
Yeah.
And not only that, we also went to the CEO Sridhar's village by another flight. And basically it was, guys, we're not going to talk too much about product. We're going to talk to you about understand the company, understand how we are a much larger company than people give us know about, because we have not shared much. It's a private company and they take that pretty seriously, right? It's fascinating, Bob. I mean, this is a vertically integrated company like you won't believe. I mean, their campus, they have 10,000 people on the campus. It's not an outsourcing firm. This is a company. But they've got their own NOC, they've got their own, so the technology, they use a lot of open source, the data centers are all, it's a very different company, very little outsourced. But more importantly, from a cultural perspective, they've got a hospital right on campus.
Oh, wow.
They have their own school where they have graduated 1,500 kids who are now part of the company. They've got a design school. They have an in-house digital agency that these graduates from the design school join. So just amazing culture. And, all along, they were allowing junior executives to present to us, very confident, the loyalty factor, just unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
And then we went to Tenkasi, the rural village, and there's a rural organic farm, more schools, more. You go, this is a way of life, And the CEO told me a few years ago, he said, in India, most of the outsourcing firms get the cream of the top. They go to the engineering schools, they get the top candidates. I've gone the other way. I hire for aptitude.
Yeah.
Not.
Yeah.
I hire for attitude. I want
Yeah.
to be hungry, and I'll invest in them. I said, several of us were talking. Could this ever be transported to the West? I don't think so, but we probably need to. I mean, these guys have built a product that is very competitive for the mid-market, right? And their ambitions are not going to end there. In 5 years, they're going to be in different vertical markets and so on, right? And we'll have to face up to the fact that, our business model that we've enjoyed in the West for a while may be challenged a lot more. But it was just a fascinating trip to go for, all the way across the world for a 6
Yeah.
there. The amount of effort they took, I mean, it was, I had two of the analyst relations folks on a call similar to this. And they said, it looked well choreographed. We were making adjustments every 5 minutes. I mean,
that's the real world, right?
Well, because, just, what do you do in a city like Chennai with so much traffic? Well, they had the first session over breakfast in the hotel so that we'd miss the office traffic and then get on a big bus and go to the campus, right? They're very creative in the way they organize everything. It was exhausting, but very well done. So, kind of another evolution in the industry. Good to see all that. So I'm going to shut up there. Why don't you talk about one that you've been to that I wasn't at?
Well, I'll sure do that, Vinny. I think it's great. And, the part of doing the sort of stuff we do is, again, because there's a certain formula that some tech companies use about doing these analyst summits, somebody could fall into a rut and just say, yeah, I got to go to all these things and poor me, I got to get on airplanes and stay at fancy hotels and eat nice food and talk to, but this sense of wonder that you just expressed about this, I think, Vinny, it's one of the reasons why you continue to have such high visibility and trust from people, because you do not fall into that rut of same old crap and get bored with what you're doing. So I read some of the posts or things that you mentioned about your Zoho trip, and it just sounded like really a trip of a lifetime for somebody who's probably been on every continent, stayed at, all sorts of wonderful places. So I just think it's great. And that's so important, I think, for what you do and bring that sense of awe and wonder and possibility, because I think the laziest, easiest thing in the world is to become cynical or pessimistic or snarky with some of this stuff. That stuff, right? We all master that in 8th or 9th grade. It's pretty nice to be able to get beyond that and think intelligently and give a company like Zoho this opportunity to be seen. And maybe it'll have an influence on other people. And competition, God knows, competition makes everybody better, whether it comes in a traditional or untraditional.
I can tell you, I have heard from several analyst relation people. Would you quit talking about Zoho? Guys, you guys were so all over the place about them. I mean, it was not forced. It voluntarily came out of everyone who was there. We were like looking at each other and saying, "Is this replicable? Probably not." Yeah. Oh my God, let's enjoy the what they built here.
Yes. Yeah. So, Vinny, the one that an event that I had been to recently that you were not able to attend was Oracle had back-to-back 2 days, an application summit and a database summit. And let me mention that to me, the highlight from the application summit day, they had some fantastic customers. So that, I think, I share with you the appreciation for seeing those things. But there was a presentation of Oracle speakers that to me reflected a very different mindset that Oracle has now. So the company has always sort of intentionally boxed off the different operating units. So, but in this one, they had sort of a three-way discussion. Steve Miranda talking about their traditional big LOB applications, then Mike Cecilia talking about their industry applications, then Evan Goldberg talking about their NetSuite applications. So it for the first time that I can recall showed sort of this seamless continuum or spectrum of Oracle applications in ways that the company just hasn't wanted to talk about before. So I thought on the application side, that was terrific. And of course, there was endless discussion about the infusion of AI into all of those different areas. And then on the database day, there were parts of the presentation that I think it was a grind. If I told you that I was riveted, for the whole 8 hours, that would be a lie. Some of this stuff, I think you could see the presentations were aimed at a continually smaller and smaller, narrow-casted audience. And I think for that, tiny number of people, both the analysts who were there and the audiences of those analysts, this was great. I think for most people, it was sort of deadly, but that all flipped at the end of the day. They'd been talking about this executive Q&A session. And some of the Oracle AR people, in a very nice way, were being sort of extra fussy about, who's going to ask a question, where do you sit, and you got to be here or there. And I said, what the hell is all this about? And then, the Zoom call kicked in, and I thought, why are they doing that? Because all the executives for the database business are in the room, and it was Larry Ellison. So he answered questions for 75 minutes. And fascinating, sort of the end-to-end discussion. I do want to say, Vinnie, I won't name any names here, but at the very end, somebody asked Larry, he said, what? I'd love to have you weigh in on, do you prefer the term data fabric or data mesh? And there's just this priceless look on this giant screen of Larry Ellison's face. And he also on the Zoom call was Juan Loaiza, and he said, Juan, I think that one's for you. So Juan tried to sort of offer some answer, and they came back to Larry, and Larry said, look, I've answered a lot of questions on a lot of subjects for a very long period of time, but he said, I have nothing to say about that. So it was just sort of a nice bit of humor at the end of the day. But I think the bigger thing is here you've got a guy who is as technical as any executive, especially one so successful, has ever been. He didn't know or care about this stuff. So if he doesn't know about it, let's roll that out to customers and all. And it, I thought, was a great lesson to the tech industry. Don't fall in love with your arcane terms and language and scopes, and keep pushing up to the top. Let me see the world through the eyes of the customers, and let me speak in the voice of the customers. So clearly some talk had to...
I'm so pleased to hear they brought Steve and Mike and Evan together. 5 years ago, after going through several conferences in a year, I went to them and I said, guys, why don't you do a summit and bring this all together? And I upset a few executives for suggesting it. So I'm glad it's taken them a while, but I'm glad they're doing it that way.
Yeah. Vinnie, for all those years, Oracle referred to their industries business as the IBUs, I think, the independent business unit, or GBUs, general or global. Like, what the hell did that? But it was a way to keep them separate. And now it's becoming more mainstream, and now Oracle's pushing these things into the mainstream. So I agree with, I'm glad you, put that bug in their ear 5 years ago, and it took them a little while, but it was very effective.
One thing, Bob, before we sign off, obviously generative AI is a huge amount of buzz. So across these four, what did you see? Anything? Where is it? If you were to summarize it, is it still very early, hype? Is it going to be anything? Give me your perspective.
Yeah, Vin, it's funny. I will say that, going back to your point at the Workday event, when Cheyenne Chakraborty gave that just incredible insight about what are large language models and why are these unfathomably big ones now creating all these new possibilities and opportunities. But short of that, I think most of the vendors are in and I think this is going to be a 3 to 6 month thing, not long lived. But everybody's saying, well, I got that and I got that and I'm doing this and I'm doing this, because they don't want to be seen as, the slackers or faller behinders. I hope very quickly they get around to that, because that stuff got, I thought, sort of boring. It's checkbox things. When they started talking about the customer use cases and these customers lighting up and saying, this is a problem we've pounded our heads against for 10 years, and now we're going to be able to solve it, and we're going to be able to do that. And they kept talking about how now we can take these people that used to have to come to work and do this sort of soul-crushing stuff all day long. Now we can take them over here, and they're going to be able to help us grow and dazzle customers and innovate. That was when I thought the real magic came through.
And I don't think there's enough of that. I'm not hearing enough use cases, right? I'm still hearing, and they won't acknowledge it, but to me, the problem is enterprise data is still, in terms of, if you compare it to what Amazon has or Google has or Microsoft has in terms of consumer data, enterprise data is still locked up in a lot of data centers.
Yeah.
And what is in their cloud, they don't really have permissions to use. So that's going to be I think it's a little secret they're not publicly talking much about, but
yeah,
it's an ongoing issue.
Yeah.
You can't train machines unless you have a crap load of data.
Yeah.
Unique data, right, for that domain. So, and a little more imagination in use cases would be nice too. So
yeah. Vinnie, before we go, can I ask you a question, please?
Yeah.
I know a lot of times, both our backgrounds, we have a lot of books here, and, people will say, oh, have you read all those books? Because I think it was trendy in the design world for a while, people go out and buy hundreds of books, put them on their shelves. But I know, I'm sure you've read all those books, but I wonder that with the prolific authorship that you've done, have you written all those books?
So, Bob, this is not my library. This is my wife's library.
All right.
She follows the everything as a service model and rents it out by the hour. I'm just kidding. No, most of the books are hers. A few of them are ones that I've written. I'll be honest with you, I'm not a very good reader. I mean, I tend to absorb better when I am talking to people, when I see something visual. Reading is, I shouldn't say that as an author. Reading is not that easy.
No, it's fascinating because I found your books to be very readable. So in spite of your lack of interest on the consuming it sort of thing, you've mastered the art of the creation of the book writing. So Vinnie, that is a rare feat.
Well, we all have our quirks. So Bob, this is thank you for joining me for a few minutes. I'm sure the audience will find it fascinating. We covered six to 8 months of industry trends, and I don't think we pissed anybody off along the way. So you would probably hear from 1 or 2 other vendors, but that's
yeah, that's okay. I think I sense a more openness among both the vendors, all parts of the organization, of outside feedback, because they got to change so quickly, constantly, and the AR teams are getting that. So I hope your ongoing effort to help people do better on this is successful. And thanks again for letting me come on and share some ideas with you, Vinnie.
Thanks again, Bob. Let's do this again in a few months.
That'll be great. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.